Hi everyone. Today I'll be discussing Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, one of the most influential films in American history. Even if you've never seen it, you've probably heard the famous violin screeches from the shower scene or know the twist involving Norman Bates. But Psycho is much more than a horror movie. It completely changed how audiences expected suspense, horror, and even filmmaking itself. To briefly summarize the film, Psycho begins by following Marion Crane, a secretary who steals $40,000 and flees town. Today, that's around 550 grand. While escaping, she stops at the isolated Bates Motel, where she meets the shy but awkward owner, Norman Bates. After an unsettling conversation about Norman's controlling mother, Marion decides she wants to return the stolen money and make things right. However, before she gets the chance, she is brutally murdered in the now famous shower scene. The film then shifts perspectives, following Marion's sister, Lila, and her former boyfriend, Sam, and a private investigator as they search for her. In the shocking ending, we discover that Norman's mother has actually been dead for years, and Norman has developed a split personality in which he believes he is his mother. The film ends without that kind of satisfying closure that audiences were used to back in the day, leaving viewers disturbed long after the credits rolled. To understand why Psycho was so groundbreaking, we need to consider its historical context. The film was released in 1960, a period when American society was beginning to question traditional values. The optimism of the 1950s was fading, and the country was entering a decade marked by social change, civil rights activism, Cold War anxieties, and the changing attitudes towards sexuality and violence. Hollywood was also still operating under the Motion Picture Production Code, which is often called the Hays Code. These censorship rules limited how much violence, sexuality, and morality, or any kind of questionable behavior, filmmakers could show in their movies. Hitchcock intentionally pushed those boundaries. The opening scene shows an unmarried couple in bed together, something considered controversial at the time. The shower murder contains surprisingly little actual gore, yet through quick editing, music, and suggestion, it became one of the most disturbing scenes in film history. Hitchcock proved that audiences didn't need graphic violence, they only needed to imagine it. Another important influence behind Psycho was the real-life murderer, Ed Gein. Or Ed Gein, sorry, weird name. Although Norman Bates isn't a direct copy of Gein, Hitchcock borrowed elements from Gein's true crimes, including his disturbing relationship with his deceased mother. This connection to true crime helped make the story even more unsettling because it suggested that monsters could exist in ordinary places, like, for example, a hotel where you're checking in. One reason Psycho is included in a class about pivotal texts is because it transformed American cinema in many ways. Firstly, it helped establish what would later become the slasher subgenre. Many horror films that came afterward, including Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, all borrowed ideas from Psycho. An isolated killer, ordinary victims, shocking murders, and suspense built around who might survive. The film also introduced audiences to what we now call the psychological thriller. Rather than focusing on supernatural monsters, Hitchcock explored the human mind itself. Norman Bates became frightening because his violence came from psychological trauma rather than magic or the supernatural. During the 50s and 60s, psychology and psychiatry were becoming more widely discussed in American culture, and Psycho reflected that growing interest in understanding mental illness and human behavior. Another reason the film remains so significant is its use of voyeurism. Throughout Psycho, Hitchcock constantly reminds us that we are watching people. Norman secretly watches Marion through a peephole before her murder, making the audience very uncomfortable about the act of observing others. Hitchcock even manipulates the audience into sympathizing with Marion, then suddenly removes her from the story only 40 minutes into the film. That twist completely changed audience expectations. Before Psycho, viewers assumed that the main character would survive. Hitchcock proved that no character was safe. But the ending deserves special attention because it offers so little emotional closure. Instead of defeating the villain and restoring order, the audience is left with Norman sitting quietly while his mother's voice takes over completely. The final image forces viewers to continue thinking about the story long after the movie ends. Today, open-ended conclusions are very common in films and television, but Psycho helped normalize endings that leave audiences unsettled rather than satisfied. A big connection I found interesting is how Psycho changed the movie-going experience itself. Hitchcock insisted that theaters refuse admission once the movie had started because he wanted everyone to experience the surprises together. This was highly unusual at the time. Today, filmmakers still try to preserve major plot twists through spoiler warnings, social media campaigns, and secret screenings. For example, movies like The Sixth Sense, Fight Club, or Get Out all rely on audiences experiencing unexpected twists in much the same way Hitchcock intended. Another connection to today's true crime obsession: modern podcasts, documentaries, streaming series often explore the psychology behind violent criminals. Much like Psycho, encouraged audiences to examine the mind behind Norman Bates rather than simply fear him. We continue to be fascinated by understanding why people commit terrible acts, making Psycho feel surprisingly modern over 60 years later. As for Alfred Hitchcock himself, he is often called the master of suspense. He directed more than 50 films over his career and became famous for carefully controlling every aspect of filmmaking. One interesting fact about Psycho is that it was actually considered a financial risk that Paramount Pictures didn't fully support. Hitchcock personally financed much of the production using his own money and filmed it with the crew from his television show to keep costs low. Ironically, the movie became one of his biggest successes of his career and forever changed the horror genre. To conclude, Psycho remains a pivotal text in American text. Psycho remains a pivotal American text because it changed censorship, transformed horror into psychological horror, introduced many conventions of the slasher genre, redefined audience expectations, and changed the way filmmakers approach suspense and storytelling. Its influence can still be seen in modern horror films, psychological thrillers, and even conversation about crime today, psychology, and media. Now, before I wrap up, I'd like to give you guys 2 questions to think about. Number 1, how do you think Psycho would have been received if it were released for the first time today? Which parts would feel shocking? And which parts may no longer have the same impact because modern audiences have become accustomed to graphic violence and plot twists? Question 2, what do you think makes a horror movie scary? Would you say it's the monsters, the music, environment, situation, or fear of the unknown? Let me know what you think. Thank you guys for listening.